Hi, I'm Smriti Khanna.
Hi, and I'm Mahesh Menon.
Welcome to another episode of our podcast, Living Well.
So, as you know, Living Well is a podcast that deals with chronic pain and palliative care. And we have very interesting guests who come and shed light on different dimensions. So, today we have a really very interesting and a very popular guest with us, Dr. Siddharth Warrior.
Thank you
He's
so
a
much.
he's a neurologist, he's a neuroscientist, and he's a digital health creator. And whatever I know of him, he's a very approachable, very smiling, very pleasant person. And I'm looking forward to this conversation and getting to understand a little more about pain and palliative care. So I know you're a busy man. I'm going to shoot questions from the word go. The first question that I have in mind for you is, I'm a chronic pain specialist and I do palliative medicine. So, in my experience with chronic pain, that we read a lot about how chronic pain changes the brain. Could you tell us something about how our brain changes when someone experiences pain and chronic pain?
Yeah, this is one of the most fascinating aspects of all of medicine because fundamentally, pain is one of the earliest biological responses that has evolved. From the earliest stages of evolution, what is pain essentially? Pain is our body's way of telling us that something is wrong. That's it. So, that is the primary message of pain, that something is wrong. Now, pain is protective. From an evolutionary sense, pain has always meant it to be protective. So the entire system in neurology has evolved to give pain importance. The idea that pain can be false is not true evolutionarily. Pain is never false. So whenever there is pain, it is a very important thing. So pain supersedes all other information. So if I'm touching you on your left arm and pricking your right arm with a pin, you won't feel the left arm touch because pain will supersede the touch. So pain is biologically, evolutionarily important. Right? Top of the order. So whenever there is pain coming in from any limb, uh, all the way to the brain, the way the pain flows is through your nerves, into your spinal cord, up into your brainstem, into your brain. So whenever there is pain, everything else stops to pay attention to the pain. And that is how acute pain works. Right? So when there's acute pain, everything stops and you turn your attention to the pain and you take care of the pain goes away and you can move on with your life. You have hopefully solved that problem. But what if there is chronic pain? So in chronic pain, you are unable to move on. So the example that I always use is if there is a fire alarm. So if there's a fire alarm, you are immediately scared that there's a fire. So you will run, you will turn off the fire alarm, you will turn off the fire, you will put water on the fire and you will move on with your life. But if there's a fire alarm all the time, how would you function? What do you do if there's a fire alarm going on all the time in your house and you don't know where's the fire? Eventually, you will have to start getting used to the fire alarm. But that is going against all these years of evolution. And you somehow still need to learn how
Yeah,
to.
because life must go on.
Life must go on. You still need to work. You still need to go to, you still need to cook. You still need to clean with the fire alarm going on. That would maybe drive you a little, I don't know, upset. It might imbalance you. So that is what chronic pain does. In chronic pain, there is this urgent thing that is going on, and you're somehow meant to ignore it, which is why people struggle with chronic pain.
Because
Interesting.
it goes against
Very interesting.
all our reflexes, all our instincts, and it goes against that basic neurobiology.
Absolutely. And the fact that if you go to a doctor with a chronic pain and the doctor tells you there's nothing to worry, it makes it all the more difficult. Because now your biology is telling you there is something to worry, the doctor is telling you there's nothing to worry. How do you live now?
That's right.
So it's almost like I think that patients with chronic pain are almost disappointed by the fact that there is nothing wrong with them
Oh
because
yeah,
there is nothing to explain why they are suffering so
yeah.
much.
They have no
Why they are.
medal to show for it. They have suffered, and there's no medal to show for their fight. That there's nothing that you can tell people.
Yeah.
It's difficult.
So when they come back with an MRI report and I tell them that the MRI is normal, there's almost a sense of, but how? Because they think that us saying the MRI is normal is in a way us saying that it's all in their head. And they don't want to hear that. They don't want to think that it's imaginary, because for them it is real. So that's one of the problems of chronic pain, because there is no objective evidence.
So there's
To
kind
show
of
that,
like
yeah.
that is the nature of suffering in chronic pain, that you feel that there is something seriously wrong, and there is a lot of other evidence telling you that there is actually nothing seriously wrong, isn't it? But uh like, if you think about it from a suffering point of view, like as palliative care physicians, we are dealing with suffering all the time. A lot of healthcare, all of that is directed towards relieving suffering. um how does the brain, and it's almost as if suffering is as distressing as, like, it's like chronic pain, it's
Yes.
extremely distressing to you, it is again top of the order. How does the brain perceive suffering, and what makes it top of the order?
Or distress, that we usually use the term distress in palliative care.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
Absolutely. So to understand suffering, we have to understand a little bit of the hierarchy of how the brain is structured. Okay. So at the lowermost level are your nerves. So the nerves carry information from the skin all the way to the spinal cord. Now, in the spinal cord, there is the dorsal column of the spinal cord, which is the posterior, the backward column of the spinal cord. And from there, pain will go up to the brainstem. Okay. And in the brainstem, there are a few centers where pain is, it's like a relay system. So the information is being handed over to the next person.
Yeah, like a
Yeah.
baton that keeps
Like
going.
a baton just keeps going. And then from the brainstem, pain, the information is handed over to the thalamus. This is the first time that pain has entered into the brain itself. Till now, it is still below the brain. Once it goes into the thalamus, it then gets distributed all over the brain. So it gets sent to the amygdala, which is the emotional center. It gets sent to the hippocampus, where the memory of the pain is stored. It gets sent to the sensory cortex, which is how you know which part of your body is hurting, and it gets sent to the prefrontal cortex. Now, this last part, which is the prefrontal cortex, is where we come to terms with the pain. So this is where we make sense of what is happening. So if I feel a sudden pain in my knee, and I know that this knee pain has happened because I just slipped and fell and I hit my knee, now my prefrontal cortex will make a story that because I fell, I hit my knee, hence the pain is happening.
That's a thinking part of
It's a thinking
the
part.
analytical.
Correct. And now, because I have this story, I am able to process that pain in a different way. Whereas if I'm just sitting and I suddenly get this pain, my prefrontal cortex doesn't know what to make of it. So the reason I'm explaining all of this is because suffering is subjective.
So suffering is your story.
Yes. Suffering is how we interpret pain. So there is this line that I keep coming to, which is pain is inevitable, suffering is optional. So pain is going to happen in life. Something or the other is going to cause some kind of damage. But how we take it is absolutely up to our prefrontal cortex. So that is why put two people in the exact same situation and they suffer differently. Say two co-residents in the KEM medicine ward, and one of them is dealing with it okay, one other one is completely in tears.
This is also about the subjective nature of pain, isn't it? Like, two people who feel the same stimulus will feel it very differently, because the entire story that they weave around that pain is different. So for some it is it's a big deal, and it's something that is like occupies top of
Yes.
their mind, and for some it's not.
So there's this interesting analogy that we heard in a conference. It's about they spoke about people who would watch more movies and films when they were recruited in the military and they were actually on the field and they would get gunshot wounds. Their response were more florid than people who were not into movies, because they didn't know what to
Interesting.
expect. So their mind is already But all the areas that you mentioned are somehow now beginning to work together to create this story. They're all writing their paragraphs in that story. And there's this another line that I use from Leo Tolstoy. He says that every happy family is the same, and every unhappy family is unhappy in its own way. So the same, yeah.
Absolutely, because that is the nature of how we interpret pain. Because when we suffer, we are also in a way telling ourselves what is our priority. So this was a study that was done, which is how much pain does a soldier feel when they are shot, and it completely depends on the intensity of battle.
There's another factor there.
Yes, so there are soldiers who don't even realize that they're shot until they're back in the camp, because they're so caught up in, say, saving their life or saving someone else's life, that they may have a bullet in their body and they may not even feel it, because the adrenaline is so much. So how much we suffer really depends on what else is happening in our
What
lives.
else is happening? Yeah. But
So I think this is sorry. I think this is also why we find this in our own families. We find this even amongst the patients that we see, that when faced with a crisis, there is one or two family members there will be who will kind of step up, and who will be either they will take up the caregiving role, or they will take up the planning and the like the supportive kind of role. And whereas for the other ones, they will be preoccupied with, say, grief at having a loved one who has this kind of illness. There will always be this one or two people for whom in their mind it just changes. The narrative just changes into something maybe not related to the suffering that their loved one is feeling, and more towards, okay, how can I solve this, what can I do for this? You've seen this,
we've
right?
seen this. In fact, we see this with people themselves who are undergoing chronic diseases. We
Hmm.
call it the locus of control. So some people prefer to take all their decisions themselves,
Hmm.
and some people assign it. So you try to
Hmm.
explain to them. They say, don't tell me, just tell it to my son or daughter
Hmm.
or relative,
Hmm.
whoever's in charge.
Yeah, yeah.
So what makes people react in these ways?
Different ways. The locus of control is very interesting because it is about how we cope. So essentially, when we are dealing with pain, it actually boils down to a question of control. Because if I'm in pain and my only objective in my life in that one moment is to get rid of that pain, right? Now, one way to get rid of that pain is to stop the source of the pain. The other way that people do to get rid of the pain is to say that this doesn't matter to me. So there is a sense of detachment that comes from this. Is also a way of coping. So because we are talking about psychological pain here, we're not talking of physical pain. So
And the suffering also.
and the suffering also. So if you're not able to remove the source of pain, or if you're not able to locate the source of pain, then the next best thing is to come up with a psychological trick to get rid of that pain, which is that this is not my problem. Let somebody else handle it.
SEP, somebody
Somebody
else's
else's problem. Exactly, like Hitchhiker's Guide. So these are psychological maneuvers that the brain comes up with, the prefrontal cortex comes up with, in order to get rid of the pain. Because the worst feeling is that I am in control and I can't do anything.
That's right.
This sentence is terrible. So one of those has to change. Either I can do something or I'm not in control.
Absolutely.
So then you have to put it on someone
Yeah.
else.
So if either I'm going to be doing something, or I'm not in control, so someone else is in control. So it's
Correct. Which is why religion is a big thing in hospitals.
spirituality, and yeah, we use
Yeah,
that in palliative care also. Yeah.
Yeah.
correct. Because it really helps people cope, knowing that, oh, it's not in my hands.
Or
And
someone else is responsible
but if
for
people
it.
who don't believe in religion will then say, oh, it's the doctor's fault. Which is why a lot of doctors insist that you believe in God. They will come and say, "Sab upar wale ke haath mein, hum to."
Yeah, we've seen that in movies also, those dialogues that come in. But on a side note, Do atheists feel suffering differently from any idea of this?
I have not read any research comparing atheists to religious people who believe in religion, but I would say that everyone comes to terms with it in their own way. So even if an atheist does not believe in any particular god, there will be a point in time where they will come up with some story. They will say, this is how the universe works. Or they will say things like, it is what it is. Or maybe it's meant to be. The words
Or
don't have
everything
meaning
happens
for
for
a
a
reason.
reason, for good.
Right. So they will say something. It's almost like a placeholder.
So you transfer
Yeah.
your belief system from
Yeah, yeah.
an entity in the clouds
Yeah.
to
Oh, yeah.
To the randomness of life.
to the
To
Or
say
you
random.
that,
go onto the universal scale and say that we are just a small speck in the galaxy, so our problems, we
Don't
try to
matter.
we weigh our problems against the infinite space, and
Space,
space
yeah.
na such.
इसमें क्या है? So these are all psychological tricks to just allow our sense of control to diminish.
It's almost like the brain also plays dice sometimes, because some psychological trick that somebody will use to cope with an illness will not work each time.
That's a
So
beautiful line. The brain will play
the
dice.
brain
Huh?
is playing dice here, because okay, see, you have a patient with advanced cancer, started on chemotherapy. Okay, initial scans are looking good, so they are positive, they're like hopeful, okay, let's do gung ho, all of that. And then slowly the scans start to worsen, and then coping mechanisms, that becomes difficult. Then they may get depressed, they may get sad, they may say, okay, I don't want to do chemo anymore because I've lost hope. So it's almost like the brain is now unable to use the same coping mechanism that it was before.
Yeah. Yeah. So the brain will have to keep coming up with new ways. And when it doesn't, that is when suffering increases.
So I think this is what they mean by the sixth stage of grief. I mean, I'm sure we all know about the
The
five
five
stages
stages,
of
yeah.
grief. There is denial,
Denial.
there is anger, there is bargaining, there is depression, and there is acceptance. And then comes the sixth stage of grief, which is finding meaning.
That's nice.
Which is then, what that means is that you are finding another way to cope
Cope with the whole thing, yeah.
with the loss of
So
a
it's like
loved one.
another throw of the
It's
dice.
another throw of the
So
dice.
you do that, and yeah. Wow. So interesting things coming up here. So I want to expand on what you mentioned about how people take over and they step into that role and become caregivers. So now another question, you spoke about how evolution has wired pain, to be protective. At the same time, we look at nature and we talk about survival of the fittest. So in animals, in nature is not too kind. If you actually look at it, if someone's unfit or ill or has a disease, the greater good or the larger group of animals tends to move on without paying much attention. What is it in humans that makes us different, or how are we wired differently? Because we seem to be one organism that where someone has a disease, we there is a group of people who actually go and try to help and heal, and that is not looked upon as a bad thing. In the sense, the whole most of the human race, most of the human species, the organism, as it were, believes in this philosophy that we must care. And so what is the neurobiology of this part? Is it an aberration?
We can call it altruism, which is helping somebody without any obvious benefit in return.
That's
Right? So this problem has been approached from many angles, from an evolutionary perspective, even from game theory, from the whole prisoner's dilemma perspective, that why would someone help if there was nothing to gain, right? And the answer is that there is something to gain. It's just that there is nothing to gain in the short term. And that is why animals don't do it. Because animals function on a short term memory basis. Everything is immediate. I'm angry, I'll bark now. If I'm hungry, I'll go to eat now. There is very little um, wait around to see what happens in the next 10 years. So there's no long term thinking, because long term thinking is a function of your prefrontal cortex, and that evolved only after chimpanzees. So animals are physically, biologically unable to think beyond the immediate. So any animal that can think beyond the immediate, actually they do help uh, tribe members that are injured. So this has been noted not just in humans but also in monkeys. It has been noted in orca whales. It has been noted in dolphins. So there are animal species who have evolved prefrontal
Even
cortex.
more intelligent animals do it, you mean?
Yes, correct. And the reason is that it is still selfish, but it is selfishness played over decades, not over days to
Survival
months.
of the species,
It's survival of the,
not
yeah.
survival of
Right.
individual.
Because what evolution has figured out is that if you care for people when they're old, then you are more likely to do more things for society, thinking that I will also be cared for when I am old. If all of us were to believe that as soon as we turn 50 we are going to die, what is the motivation for us to work when we are 40? Right? But we, all of us sitting here, we believe that even when we are 70 we will be taken care of somehow, somewhere. So
That's
this
important.
So we
thought is
feed
very
back into
important.
that system that will nurture
Correct.
us.
So it's
And
like,
it's very selfish.
yeah, it's like an evolutionary mechanism to make sure that we are protected by extending good work into the society, and that comes back to us. So good karma is actually,
Karma is a thing.
karma is a thing.
And all morality is selfish. So it's a falsehood that, oh, you should be kind to others without expecting anything in return, because you can't expect anything in return in the absolute short term, but in the long term it is an exchange.
Yeah, there's a validation. There's something that's happening that's giving meaning, and that
Yeah.
at least you're finding meaning. Even caregivers seem to be finding meaning there. Interesting.
So finding meaning, I think, is the, like, that's what the PFC does, right? Like that's what it
Yes. That is the prefrontal cortex's main function. It is to find meaning and to attach meaning and connect it to everything else that the brain is doing. Because the brain will do whatever it does anyway. You will feel pain, you will react to pain, you will feel emotions, you will cry, you will get angry, you will get hungry. The prefrontal cortex's job is to constantly find meaning of all this and keep rearranging reality so that things make sense.
I like again the words that both of you are using. You use beautiful phrases like we rearrange reality, So it's very beautiful turn of phrase. So one of the things that she introduced was like this 5 or 6 stages of grief, and that's just something I wanted to ask you about, because I feel that once you're caring for people as a species, we are caring for people, and when it fails, and then there is something called grief or bereavement, and that happens afterwards, so that we notice that. So,
And that's something I think that, like, grief and bereavement is something that we really look at, because that's one of the aspects of palliative care that we cover, which is kind of groundbreaking in medicine, in medicine per
Yes.
se, because there are hardly any other fields of medicine that actually talk about grief and bereavement, and looking at it as a separate aspect of the field in itself.
because the person you're going to be serving is no longer there.
It's
That
no
is
longer
gone,
there,
and then
yeah.
you're extending that
So
umbrella
the subject,
yeah.
the subject of the subject or the patient that you're going to be looking after is not there, but you are looking after the rest of the family after he's gone. So cancer has this concept of survivorship.
Correct.
But that is after the disease is gone. The patient is still there. The person is still
Still
there.
there.
Whereas in palliative care, we talk about how to handle grief, how to make space for grief, how to not pathologize it, like how to keep it as a normal aspect of life. And these 6 stages that Avi spoke about. So even though traditionally, when the discussion started on these 5 stages and then the 6th one, it was first thought that, okay, it is one after another. There's denial, and then there is anger, and then there is bargaining. Then later on, it was said that it can be interchangeable at any point of time. You may have one stage at one point, you may have multiple stages going on together at another point.
Yeah, you can still be
but
depressed when you're trying to find meaning.
yes, exactly. But like as you said, again, it's the PFC or the prefrontal cortex trying to make meaning of something that has happened in your life, right? So would you say that that is grief?
So, grief is essentially our brain coming to terms with loss. And our brain has never truly come to terms with loss. So, right from childhood, if you've played peekaboo and the mother's face disappears for a second, the child is filled with this puzzle. Like, where did it go? Where did it go? And when the mother's face comes back, it is filled with joy because, oh, it's come back. What if the mother's face never comes back?
Mm.
That puzzle remains. We have never fully come to terms with the fact that something can go, ever. So, for example, it can be something as simple as, oh, I lost my pen. I forgot my pen in the school bus. You feel the sense of, Arey, why did I forget it? You know, when you're in school, or I forgot my water bottle. Apparently, I used to forget water bottles every week. So, my mom used to buy water bottles in bulk because I would forget one every week. And every week, I would feel that terrible sense of, Arey, where is it? Where is it? I don't know. Because now it's suddenly lost. In the whole world, it could be anywhere.
So you must have made 350 children in your school very happy, with all the water bottles that
It's just lying around. Yeah. So there's an ocean of water bottles somewhere with my name in it. But the sense of grief is our brain coming to terms with the fact that something is lost. We have no access to that thing, that person, that experience, that emotion anymore. So if it's a memory, we'll call it nostalgia because it's something that happened, it's done, and there is no way for me to go there again.
So
So
nostalgia
you've
is
lost that moment, but not that person.
Correct, but that moment is gone, right? So you feel that you feel nostalgia when it is when it is something that you wish you had done differently, you call it regret. And when it is something that you can no longer even touch or see, when it's a physical thing, then you call it grief. It's just our brains coming to terms with the fact that something used to exist and now it doesn't.
so it's
And
a
so
puzzle you
then,
It's
used.
a puzzle, and since childhood till old age, our brain has never really come to terms with the fact that something can exist and then not exist. How does that happen?
and so then all these stages of grief are just the brain's way of coping, like
Correct.
just the brain's way of making the story around.
It is trying to make this puzzle fit.
Yeah. So why has this happened? And that answering that the answer to that puzzle
So my grandmother went away. So anger at the fact that she left
left.
me.
Like you're blaming somebody, it's someone's fault. First, you say that no, this never happened. Then you will say that no, this you're angry at somebody. Somebody must have messed up. That's why this
That's
happened.
why.
Yeah, that's easier to believe. It's easier
Yes.
to believe that story that somebody
Yes.
has messed up rather than this is part of the process of life.
Yes. That this is a cosmic event that happens. That things go. That things stop existing is something that we have never come to terms with. And there are reasons for why we don't come to terms with it, which is a deeper spiritual question, because then it raises a question mark on our own mortality. Because we don't want to come to terms with the fact that if that thing can go, then I can go. And that hurts. So we don't want to come to terms with that. So before we have to come to terms with that, we try to avoid the original question of why did this person go? And so initially denial, then we get angry, then we think, oh, do I have control? Maybe I can bring them back. So now we are coming to terms with the fact that maybe they did go, but they can be brought back. Correct. That is where all those seances and people who talk to spirits and all come in. Because we have this, we want to believe that there is some connection still. Depression is actually an interesting stage because that's where we finally come to terms with the fact that yes, it's gone, but you haven't accepted it yet. And then there's acceptance. But like you said, you can still go back. You can accept, and then there are days where you still can't believe it. You might still throw a glass at a wall saying, how could they go? How could they leave me? All that. Correct. it is coming to terms with it. And this can be with a person, it can be with a pet, it can be with anything. Yeah, it is more of our brain's inability to come to terms with something not existing.
Mm. Again, that fabric of reality thing, that this is a new reality that we have to adjust to. That reality that we have in our head, that doesn't seem to be making sense with this reality.
Yeah.
Correct. Because our reality is always of permanence. Always. Since birth, everything that we see and touch and feel around us is permanent. We have never dealt with anything non-permanent, or we've never accepted that things are
So that means
non-permanent.
for us, status quo is permanence.
That's
And when
right.
there is impermanence or something going away,
Correct.
it's almost like a stimulus that keeps coming, and then you have to keep convincing yourself,
That's
or
right.
your brain has to keep saying that gone. And then the next moment you think, okay, maybe not gone. But then it's
Yeah.
like gone.
So it's like, yeah, if I open Google Maps and I see heavier than traffic on your route, I know it's normal.
Yeah.
If it's not, that means I don't have an internet connection. So
Yeah,
You know,
it's what
there
you're
is
used to.
you're
Yes.
used to.
there is one thing that has really intrigued me personally in my palliative care journey is how the idea of medicine is tied with the idea of care.
Mm.
Okay. um Something that struck me a lot whenever I did palliative consultations with patients is that whenever, in some way or the other, I brought their humanity back into the
Mm.
discussion. This could be by just smiling at them. This could be by saying, I know this can be hard. This could be by saying, I'm sorry that this has happened. I just brought that element of reality, of humanity
Humanity.
back
Yeah.
into it, and just sort of made this one moment where it's just about recognizing that something terrible has happened, and that just lifts a weight off
Mm.
a lot of shoulders. It lifts a weight off the patient's shoulders, the family's shoulders, and your own shoulders. It's almost like a moment of like lightening.
Mm.
You must have also experienced this.
Yeah, in the sense, it sometimes it takes them by surprise
Mm.
that when they've been to multiple physicians and when they have come to us and we ask them, so with all of this, and they're talking about their pain and other things, and we said, so how are you feeling with all of this?
Yeah.
And
How are you coping? How are
how
you
are you
feeling?
coping and what's happening? And then I find that the other thing, that when I ask the caregiver who's there with them and they're stone faced and not like looking at anyone and very somber, like they're not there, they just, the words are just going in and they're grieving, I can see that. And I ask them, how are you doing? And suddenly that whole thing comes collapsing like
The
a
dam bursts.
like dam burst. And then there's so much there, of course that's where the professional therapists are around. And but unless someone asks them and assigns that sense of them being people and who are
Yeah.
actually dealing with this
Yeah.
reality change,
Yeah.
Yeah.
then that I think
So it's
brings.
almost like as if just that reminder of, okay, at the end of the day, no matter what hierarchy we are working with, I'm a doctor, you're a patient, and there is a hierarchy. At the end of the day, what it means is that it's like a common humanity that's shared.
That shared
Yeah.
humanity thing.
That makes such a difference. It just
Correct.
increases trust. It will help them open up more.
Mm.
And I wonder what it is that makes them do that.
Yeah.
Why does that happen?
So there is a need for an anchor. All our lives, we need an anchor to hold us to what you call reality, right? So what happens in pain, or what happens with grief or loss, is that reality is shaken. In that moment, if somebody you love is passing away, your reality is being shaken. So all of them, all the things that they're going through, them, they might be acting out in different ways. Some people really shut down, some people get overtly loud, some people might get violent. Taking a step back and looking at it, you know that they're all trying to cope in their own ways. They're all trying to cope with this new reality, and they're not able to, right? So in that moment, what they really need is a sense of safety. Like they need a sense of grounding. They need a sense of you are okay, because the suffering is entirely because of this uh, inability to deal with this reality. The closest that I have felt this, closest that I've come to this is once when I was scuba diving and I was some 30 meters underwater, and water went into my goggles and it went into my nose, and I started panicking pretty severely. It happened just like that. One moment I was okay, the other moment I couldn't breathe and I was panicking and I thought I'll go up, and uh, I was in a lot of emotional distress because I thought I was dying. Fair enough. I'm
30
allowed to.
Yeah,
meters
especially with
below.
the absence of gills and
Everything,
yeah,
exactly, because evolutionarily I'm supposed to
to
be
be up.
Up there.
up there.
What is this?
So, huh. And so I thought I was going to die, and I was very, very, very panicky. And my instructor kind of grabbed me and told me, we couldn't speak underwater, just told me to look into his eyes and just keep breathing. Nothing else changed. There was still water in my goggles, it was still hitting my nose, but gradually I could feel my panic go away. So even though the circumstances has remained the same, my suffering reduced.
That's
Right.
beautiful. Yeah, this
Hmm.
because it was shared now with someone who's
Yes, and somebody made me feel that I am safe. Even if my circumstances are still less than ideal, I am safe, and that there's someone to kind of guide me through it. And then I was okay. And then I could clean the mask and then everything. So then I could control myself. But in that moment, I needed that. I believe that in grief, what everybody goes through is some version of this, which is my reality is not making sense. I am going to die, and they will act out. What you need as a therapist or a palliative care physician or a pain management specialist is some way of telling them that yes, reality sucks, but I am here and you will be okay. You still have an anchor. And just allow them to pass through that moment of panic, which is basically their limbic system overacting, and allow their prefrontal cortex to take charge again. They just need that much of a bridge, because everyone's prefrontal cortex is capable of handling them. They've handled them all their lives. They just need a bridge to get them through that moment. So that's the humanity bit you're saying, which is just that shared you and me together here, we will make it through. That feeling has to come.
from what you said in the beginning. I feel that this ability and this way of dealing with suffering is also something that has evolved in medicine as this, of course, selfish altruism. That we know that this is another way in which we can make the journey a little. So whatever we keep doing is we look at all the pressure points that can make people have distress, and we try to address it.
Yeah.
It's just an extension of that selfishness or that long term gains that we are looking at.
Yeah.
And that's what we try and do as scientists, in the sense. And I'm sure that a lot of people who work on different things also have this in mind, that they keep trying to fix problems, and they could be very happy with their lives, but that kind of legacy thing or whatever.
Yeah.
So very interesting neuroscientific points that have come up. But you're a neurologist and you see people with neurological ailments, in addition to, of course, to spreading so much information on the social media and the digital space about health.
Yeah.
If I were to ask you, what is your understanding of palliative medicine, palliative care, what would you say it would be?
Uh, I would say that we are still discovering what palliative care means. I don't think as a medical community we still truly understand what palliative care means, because we are still brought up with a certain view of medicine. We are still brought up with a curative view of medicine. We believe that all health problems are problems to be fixed. That is the way we look at it. Whatever we might say, we will look at it that way. The idea of acceptance seems almost like a failure,
Mm.
Death as
right?
failure.
okay, oh, you have to accept this. Oh, that means you don't really know what to do.
Yeah, so we are ultra competitive and we can't be second best.
Yeah, or like we don't, the idea of telling somebody that there is a part of their suffering that they have to accept seems like a fault. And so, in order to fix that, we will do whatever we can to not have to say that, almost as if that person has no agency and that person has no power or no responsibility or no agency to live their own life and to live through whatever comes to their life, as if we have the power to change what they experience.
Yeah, there's no shared decisions there.
Right. So, at a philosophical level, I feel that we are all wired to think of medicine in a particular way, and palliative care challenges that notion.
This
Yeah,
is
we
something
I
that I've
always
thought
suspected we are
of.
more evolved.
We are.
Somewhere I felt that,
Hmm.
That, I
Yeah.
mean, this is a thought that I've had before, that palliative care is actually a revolution in a way.
Yes, and it's an interesting revolution because it is a revolution that goes back. It's a spiritual revolution because a lot of palliative care is very spiritual. It truly comes down to the purpose of man, or the nature of life, or what does it mean to suffer, and what does it mean to be detached. It is Bhagavad Gita. It
All
is,
existential question.
yes, absolutely. So it is in fact a revolution, but it is also a circling around. So for me, that is very interesting. That all science, and for me, I find it more interesting because that was my journey through neurology as well. Because you go through MBBS, MD, DM, and everything, and then you go into neuroscience, and then eventually you realize, oh, that is how faith works. That is how prayer works. Oh, this is why spirituality helps. And you kind of come full circle around religion and God and all of that. And what does life mean and what does death mean from a very scientific sense. And I feel that all of medicine will eventually go there, and palliative care is clearly the door to that conversation. So for me, this is just the beginning. I feel that we are just scratching the surface, and palliative care will eventually become the scientific, the scientist's way of understanding spirituality.
Interesting.
Interesting. Yeah. Well, thanks for making me feel so good about myself.
My pleasure.
So,
As a doctor, that's what I do.
yeah, I mean, and I'm sure that, I'm like thinking, what can I do for you now, so that your long term, it's already short term rewards you're getting. That's very interesting way of saying that we are focusing on the science of uh, what it means to be human, the science of the human experience. And that's beautiful.
I'm very excited that you guys are doing this podcast. This is a great initiative. I don't think there are other podcasts like this. I have not come across them. And I'm excited to see where you guys take this. I hope you take it. There's no all the way, but I hope you keep taking it forward.
Absolutely. So I just want, why do you call it living well?
I call it living well because I think it goes with all my ideas of what it means to live well, which is being able to have choices in my hands, being able to have my treatment tailored to my needs, my preferences, uh, being able to express if I'm in pain, if I'm in distress, having someone hear and understand that and address that. Some of these things have not been addressed in medicine as I saw it, which is what made me get into
Get into
palliative care.
palliative care.
And this is something that I believe that is the right of every individual. That no matter what your illness, you should still
yeah.
be able to live well.
So yeah, that's why we wanted, we when we called you on board also to talk about this topic in palliative care, and we gave this a title, living well. The whole idea is to talk about a concept of life as it is,
Yeah.
not talk about sadness or sickness or grief or mortality, but look at all of that as a part of life itself,
Yeah.
and live it well.
Yeah.
That is going to happen. So
Yeah.
it's
Yeah.
that's the initiative to at least spread that word. And thanks for being here and sharing so much information. There's so many things that I learned today, and beautiful phrases both of you have been throwing out there. I'm going to just, I wish I could have written them down. And so it's very
Thank you so much. This was a pleasure being part of this conversation. Thank you.